to come for First Pres next Sunday at 9:30, then come over for Radiant Communion. And of course, then our communion service here will be once again on the first Sunday of the month, as always. I love the way God comes to Abram in this story. And really, the story begins at the end of chapter 11 with Abram's father. For some reason, could I have a slide up on the screen? For some reason, you see their city of origin, lower right, in that green belt, Ur. Okay? And it was a wonderful city. It was a city that had a great climate, much better than the place they were going, much more developed libraries, culture, everything you could imagine, everything you could want in Ur. But for some reason, Abram's father, Terah, wanted to go to the land of Canaan. You see that on Israel, Canaan, on the left-hand side there. And to get there, they would travel along this green belt, which is called the Fertile Crescent. And they would do that because at that time, the camel had not come into widespread use. Although the camel was used, it had not come into widespread use. And so if you didn't have the camel, you couldn't go across the desert. You had to go along the Fertile Crescent where there are sources of water for your animals to drink. And so Terah, Abram's father, we read, took his grandson, took Sarai, and they went from Ur to get all the way to Canaan, but they stopped at the top of the map there in Haran. And they stopped there for some reason. We don't know why. And it doesn't say why they stopped, but they were on their way to the promised land, and they stopped. And I've always thought perhaps God came to Abram's father first before he came to Abram. And for some reason, Abram's father decided not to go all the way, or something happened. I don't know for sure, or maybe just God didn't come when he decided to go to Canaan. But in any case, God came to Abram to continue the journey that his father started. And perhaps it was a second chance for that family to fulfill the promises of God. And so the Lord comes to Abram, and I love the way this dialogue begins. It's a conversation between two guys. God's neither male nor female, but God here is talking like a guy. He comes to Abram. There's no preliminaries. There's no greeting. Leave, he says. Leave your country. Just, this is the way we talk to each other as men, don't we? Go and take everything. And I will make you great. Now, we learn in the story that Abram's a member of First Pres teenagers. He's 75 years old, right? And his wife is 65. But we learn later that she's a really beautiful, amazingly attractive 65. And these people, Abram and Sarai, they've lived their life. They're settled. They love to go out to the restaurant for the early bird special. They love teenagers. They sing in the choir. They're just set. They pretty much said, look, we've lived our life. Now we're just going to cruise. But the only really devastatingly sad thing for them, especially in that culture, was that they had no children. And it's one thing, it's devastating enough for a couple who wants to have children in our society to not to be able to have any. But even more so in that culture, because the passing on, especially no son, passing on the family name is so very important. And so God comes to this couple who are settled, and they're all together, and they're just living out their days, and says, I'm gonna do something through you. And Abram probably said, who, me? I have a friend who's actually contemplating writing a book, and it's going to be called Who Me Leadership, because that's exactly the type of person you want as a leader in your church, the person who you go to, and I think you're ready for this, and they go, who, me? Not the person who's campaigning for the job, right? The person who looks and says, who, me? And this is, I think, must have been Abram's reaction, because God was about to take Abram and Sarah and do the impossible through them. And this is often how God works. God normally works through impossible circumstances. Why? so that it is certain that God is the one who does the great thing. And Paul draws this point out from in the New Testament from the story of Abram, that it's God who is clearly God who is working here. Abram must believe, but it's God who's doing the work. Because Abram and Sarai, how are they going to create a great nation, let alone have one child? But God comes to them and says, I'm going to create a huge family through you. I'm going to bless you. And not only am I going to bless you, but I'm going to make you a blessing. Abram thought he had it all. He had a wonderful, he surrounded himself with people, and he had stuff. He thought his life was over, but God was about to show him, to call him into part 2 of his life. How many of you think your life is nearly over, or your direction is set? And I wonder if God isn't coming to you, even in this moment, and starting to tap at your heart and say, I'm about to call you into something amazing, into part 2 of your life. And God might be saying to you today, to use a cliche, is the first day of the rest of your life. That's what he said to Abram on this day. And so they left. You know, they went. He was 75 years old when he set out. And he went, as verse 7 says, he went, actually, where is this? He went. It says at one point that he was to go to a land that God would show him. Okay, or that he was go to a land that God would show him. That's in verse 1. Go to the land I will show you. In other words, God doesn't promise him the thing. God doesn't show him travel brochures for Canaan. God doesn't say, it's going to be wonderful, the climate is great, the trees are full of fruit, the city's going to be awesome, there's going to be plenty of water. God doesn't do all that, show them how great the thing is. God simply says, take my hand and close your eyes and let's go. I will show you the land. I will show you. And that's so often what God does for us.